Hello, I'm Mike Scott, here in London this time rather than Oxford in the UK, and I welcome you to this program in the series Cultural Encounters Books That Have Made a Difference. In this series, we're bringing together scholars and their audiences in order to explore themes of encounter in literary works and contemporary cultural debates. Today, we welcome Alexa Alicia Chaubin, talking about recognizing in others their otherness and doing it through Shakespeare. Alexa is Professor of English, women's studies, gender and sexuality studies, theatre, international affairs, and East Asian languages and cultures at George Washington University in DC. She's in receipt of many awards for her academic work and is widely published, including this wonderful book, which is Shakespeare in East Asia, a book on race, and a book on screen adaptations of Shakespeare, as well as many more. If any questions occur to you during this talk, please type them in using the Q&A button, not the chat button, but the Q&A button on your computer. Towards the end, I will put to Alexa as many questions as possible for her to answer. Please don't leave your questions to the last minute, as we get a bottleneck and they might not get asked. So thanks very much for joining us, and over to you, Alexa.
Thank you, Michael, for inviting me. I want to thank both Oxford and Georgetown for putting this event together. The world in its entirety is unknowable, except for fragmented, competing, and conflicting versions of it. Cultural encounter is a crucial step towards mutual and self-understanding, especially in a world divided along political fault lines. And at the center of cultural encounters is the notion of otherness, which only becomes meaningful in relation to self-perception. Drama builds on otherness, in particular, to offer embodied snippets of knowable worlds. Artists and audiences project their beliefs onto dramatic works to create hybrid worlds across cultures and history. Performances juxtapose multiple worlds, namely the fictional universe, actors' worlds, and the audience's worlds. As Jacques Derrida has pointed out, the relation between signifiers and the signified involves an endless chain of deferral. I would like to think through the idea of otherness in global performances of Shakespeare. Historically, Shakespeare's name and works have been integrated as an other within many significant world cinema and theater traditions. Shakespeare has become something that is both part of a local performance tradition and at the same time a usefully alien presence to inspire new works. Let's look at a few examples. James Ivory did a film in 1965 called Shakespeare Voila. It follows a traveling troupe of English actors performing Shakespeare in India. Shakespeare is both an icon that is familiar enough in local contexts for dramaturgical purposes and a stubbornly foreign presence that can be called upon for political agendas, as it happens in the film. Now, Shakespeare in Germany is another prominent example. There is a strong identification of Hamlet with the German national character since the 1840s. The recurring motifs depend crucially on the fact that Shakespeare is not German. He is a cultural other. Hamlet is a foreign ghost that stalks and aids the battlement of the formation of German identity. There are surprising twists in the history of global Shakespeare as well. Take The Merchant of Venice, for example. It actually was the most frequently staged Shakespearean comedy in the Middle East in the 20th century. It was often chosen as the play for inaugural theater events, such as those at the Iraqi Center for Theater and at Egypt's National Theater Troupe. Even though Arabic language criticism frequently interpret The Merchant as a cautionary tale about usury, which is forbidden by Islamic law. Prominent scholars, as you see on the screen here, such as Ibrahim al-Mazini, have sided with Shylock, viewing the character with empathy. So, in other words, the history of a location does not dictate entirely its reaction to particular texts. Beyond the merchant, British Kuwaiti bilingual playwright Suleiman Al-Bassam has created several adaptations. On the screen, you can see a stage photo of the Arabic version of his Al-Hamlet Summit on tour to Tokyo in 2004, in which an Islamicist Hamlet confronts the suicide bomber Ophelia. Set in the Arabian Gulf, this adaptation critiques Western journalistic misunderstanding of Middle Eastern politics. Now, in Anglophone cultures, directors use different accents, hybrid performance styles, and multi-ethnic cast to amplify the idea that Shakespeare is a cultural other, something that is both familiar and exotic, and by implication, worth seeing again. In 2015, Terra Arts produced its adaptation of Macbeth that was set in a migrant Asian family. British Kenyan director Jatinder Verma, who's artistic director of Terra Arts, uses the term Binglish to challenge the dominant conventions of the English stage. Here in the US, in 2016, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival produced Desdemona John's Winter's Tale with an Asian American cast. The romance was set in pre-modern China and America's Old West, combining both Asian American perspectives. This production presented the scene of exit pursued by a bear creatively. Upon arriving in Bohemia, Antigonus encounters what appears to be a large brown rock center stage. A series of lightning flashes shows first the face of a bear, followed by its claws, and eventually its body. The rock comes to life, turns around, and reveals itself to be a bear in the form of Japanese bunraku-style puppet. One puppeteer can be seen driving the bear's head, while two others are in charge of each of the bear's front limbs. The bear devours Antigonus, who, quote, exits through its mouth. In 2018, the independent film company Shanti Production debuted their 12th Night with a multi-ethnic cast. Sheila Atim's Black Viola, as you see on screen here, is one of several refugees washed ashore on a pebble beach. Director Adam Smethurst drew on the idea of otherness, noting that with the widespread rise of anti-immigrant populism and governments actively encouraging a hostile environment for refugees, she says, telling the story of the outsider surviving in an alien world on her wit became compellingly urgent. So I've noticed that performances give the airy nothing of dramatic text a place to call home. In fact, the notion of place features prominently in performances far beyond the basic question of where a story is set. Place provides an anchor for dramatic actions. All plays exist simultaneously in several dramaturgically construed localities. First, there's the question of where the story is set, basically where the characters live, where it is performed. Some venues have more symbolic significance, for instance, and the locales associated with actors' off-stage journey to where they are today. Attending to the significance of place enables closer examinations of the questions of belonging and otherness. Let's look at another example to look at how important place is in global performances. In David Kerr's A Midsummer Night's Dream, BBC 2016, we have a nightmarish space of a fascist regime enhanced with digital surveillance technologies. Actors and their characters orient themselves in the magical woods, a dream space where some social impositions are lifted while others are actually imposed. So it's not entirely liberated. Film audiences would have to go through a parallel process as they imagine social spaces that extend beyond the screen, as suggested by David Kurt's world making. So I am going to turn to a little bit to theory. And you can see on the screen here, you have Lysander and Hermia in this particular version plotting their escape on a touch screen. All these are very important points for my talk today, as it will soon become clear, because we'll talk about portals, overlapping spaces, and I have a particular theory that is built on my forthcoming book, Contemporary Readings in Global Performances of Shakespeare. It's coming out this October. It's already available for pre-order on Bloomsbury.com, simultaneously released as hardback, paperback, and ebook. And so this theory is heterotopia. It is a type of space that evokes other cultural spaces. Hetero means other, while topia, of course, is space in Greek. Heterotopia, created by the craft of world making, it anchors, enables, and endorses some characters' transformative experiences and self-discovery. The term was first used by Foucault in a lecture on architecture in 1967, and then mentioned again in The Order of Things in 1971. So the term heterotopia refers to cultural spaces that are transformative because of their contradictory or transhistorical ideologies. Foucault made a connected argument about utopia and regulatory mechanisms of prison. I'm eliding all that. I'm focusing only on heterotopia as a set of parallel spaces. The initial context of the notion was architecture and urban design, but heterotopia is useful in advancing our understanding of otherness. Michel Foucault uses the mirror as a metaphor to explain how heterotopia operates as a virtual space. The mirror is a placeless place. In the mirror, I see myself there where I'm not, in an unreal space that virtually opens up behind the surface. I am over there where I'm not, a sort of shadow that gives my own visibility that enables me to see myself there where I'm absent, says Foucault. As technologies of representation, the stage and screen work similarly to Foucault's mirror. They project and filter location-specific knowledge of otherness. To further illustrate the point beyond this comic of Foucault and multiple mirrors, I generated with artificial intelligence this image of pixelated mirror image with a person standing in front of it to further illustrate how heterotopia works. Let's take a look at another quote by Michel Foucault. He continues, it is also a heterotopia insofar as the mirror does really exist, and as it exerts on the place that occupies a sort of return effect. It is starting from the mirror that I discover my absence in that place where I am, since I see myself over there. Heterotopia exists in reality like a mirror that exists in reality, right? But it contains and evokes other spaces. As a parallel space, heterotopia holds up a mirror to other realities. And that's how the stage and screen work. They exist in reality, like the mirror, but they are a portal. The portal reminds audiences of their absence in the worlds of, for example, Hamlet or Macbeth. Audiences on one side of the dramatic mirror, seeing shadows of themselves by virtue of their vantage point and not being on the other side of mirror. Like the Foucauldian mirror, performance functions as a heterotopia, making the place that audiences occupy both distinct from the dramatic space and connected to other worlds within the performance. Heterotopia are worlds within worlds. Heterotopia expand and contract based on their tacit and explicit relationships to other places. The worlds of the characters, actors, and audiences thus collide, merge, and transform one another. And so Foucault writes that the heterotopia has the power to juxtapose in a single real place, several places, several emplacements that are in themselves incompatible. Thus, the theater brings onto the rectangle of the stage a whole series of places that are alien to one another. Thus, the cinema is a very odd rectangular room at the end of which, on a two-dimensional screen, one sees the projection of a three-dimensional space. Now it's time to dig deeper and look at multiple examples of heterotopia. I have nearly 1 slide per minute, so please follow along. If we have audiences tuning in on audio only, I will do my best to describe whatever is on the screen. First, this amazing film, Makibefo, is an example of heterotopia. This is a Malagasy film adaptation of Macbeth, directed by Franco-British director Alexander Abela in 2001. Shakespeare's early modern imaginations of medieval Scottish politics are transposed to a 20th century fishing village on the coastal dunes of Madagascar. Macbeth wages battles on the Scottish Highlands, but here the Macbeth figure named Makibefo fights and captures his enemy Kidur on a vast patch of white sand dune. Makibefo and Macbeth, they carry each other's echoes and shadows across cultural and historical spaces. Even though Makibefo is not a dialogue-driven film, the Lady Macbeth figure, as you see here, who is named Vali Makibefo, wears an intercultural shawl that signifies multiple modern and ancient cultures. Functioning like a toga, her shawl has images of a Colosseum and a fleur de lis, linking Madagascar to ancient Rome and to the French royal family. Her costume becomes a gateway to other worlds, like heterotopia. Now, there's another example, this time an adaptation of Hamlet, because Hamlet has this fair share of global shadows around the world and in many heterotopic locations. In Armenian-Iranian director Varouz Karimashvili's film Tardid, which means doubt. Medieval Elsinore is mapped onto a creamy mansion in a wealthy suburb in modern Tehran's cityscape. In one scene, a character, the main character, Siavash, the protagonist of the film, he hands a framed Farsi text that says to be or not to be on the wall of a dimly lit basement before contemplating the parallels between his life and Hamlet. In another scene, as shown here, a poster of Hamlet adorns the wall behind Siavash. His friend is trying to give him good advice and saying that just because there are parallels, you should not become a Hamlet. Stop pursuing this. His friend doesn't think that he's onto something. He thinks it's just paranoid, thinking that the death circumstances for the death of his father are suspicious. This is an innovative approach that gives materiality and a sense of location, right? A sense of local relevance to one of the most famous speeches in English literature. Siavash says that I've never been very good at making decisions. He shares Hamlet's feelings of being trapped. And later, Siavash turns regularly to Hamlet for moral guidance as he investigates the cause of his father's death under dubious circumstances. As part of his investigation, Siavash even stages a performance of Hamlet at the wedding of his mother and uncle. The Farsi text of to be or not to be on the wall of his basement in Tehran evokes Hamlet Denmark, as well as contemporary Iran, where the film's protagonist is situated and trapped. It is beside the point to ask whether the aristocratic Siavash is a representation of the princely figure of Hamlet, or whether tribesman Marquis Beffel qualifies as General Macbeth. More intellectually productive questions about otherness are: where and how do Macbeth and Marquis Beffel meet, and why? How do these meetings change our own understanding of our time and place, characters and actors? They give meanings to the space they inhabit through social and symbolic practices. You may think it's a cliche that drama transports us to a different time and place, but Heterotopia builds upon and transforms the fictional universe and our own world. Here's another example. This movie is called Baraka Meets Baraka, 2016. It's by Mahmoud Sabah. This is a rare romantic comedy film coming out of Saudi Arabia. The love story alludes to Hamlet's tentative relationship with Ophelia. The film follows the male Baraka. See, the conceit is that the two people in the couple, they have the same name. The male Baraka, a middle-class bureaucrat, and the female Baraka, a feminist fashion vlogger. The pair struggles against strict conventions of their society. The male Baraka is shown living a rather dull life, issuing citations of minor offenses as he walks around modern-day Jeddah, while the female Baraka has a livelier personality. She thrives in the virtual online space. Now, interestingly, when not working, Baraka performs as part of an amateur theater troupe. In one scene, unable to find women to participate in their production, they're doing Hamlet. Baraka's troupe had him play Ophelia. He appears in drag, thickly bearded. Instead of embracing his stage role, Baraka looks dejected in his blonde wig and green and teal ball gown. In an earlier scene backstage, he strains to zip up the costume. He is coached on how to simulate having breasts. On the theater stage within the film, Baraka plays the mad Ophelia in monotone. The scene serves both as comic relief and a sober reminder of Saudi law that prohibits women from performing with men. The camera, with a frontal shot with deep focus, follows Baraka as moves laterally on a small stage, handing out flowers, telling an off-camera audience, "That's for remembrance. Pray you love, remember." Inspired by his involvement in theater, Baraka later has a dream in which he plays Hamlet alongside his lover who plays Ophelia. The stage in the film is a heterotopic space that connects us with Western values and with Hamlet. It is also set apart from Jeddah as a dream space for Baraka. Further, Saudi Arabia and its draconian laws. So the draconian laws of Saudi Arabia actually serve as a framing device to tell a story of entrapment, a story that parallels Hamlet. The interplay between these worlds informs the dynamic of global performances. The vitality of global performances derives from the clashes and synergy of overlapping heterotopic localities. And now it is time to delve deeper into our first case study. I'll spend a little bit more time with this particular one. Yukio Ninagawa's Japanese language high concept touring production of Hamlet turns the art of theater making inside out through its meta-theatrical conceit. The production opens with actor characters warming up, running their lines, and touching up on their makeup. They mill around on a set that represents the backstage of a theater where the actor characters both prepare for and stage Hamlet. The two-story set consists of dressing rooms with privacy curtains, complete with lighted mirrors, photographs, and bouquets. The lower level is a common dressing room area for everyone, while the upper level is reserved for leading actor characters' individual dressing rooms. This backstage space is now upstage, This set doubles as rooms in Elsinore Castle once the play Hamlet begins. The action of the play takes place in the heterotopia that consists of gateways, dressing rooms, and castle chambers all at once. Of particular interest is that dressing rooms are worlds unto themselves, but also points to other worlds once their doors open. Think about it. Dressing rooms are an in-between space, right? That transform those who pass through them. You go to the dressing room in order to become someone else. Actors walk into dressing rooms as 21st century artists and emerge as characters in medieval Denmark, for example. So the creation of this backstage as playing space is part of Ninagawa's world-making strategies to both deconstruct and amplify the artifice of performance. The dressing room mirrors are quite Foucauldian in the sense that they, as devices of heterotopia, juxtaposes self-image with stage image. Self-image against stage image, and they juxtapose visible and invisible worlds. Let's take a look at the next. Here you see in the middle of the play, you have the billowing curtains, thanks to electric fans. These curtains add a sense of unease and mystery. Each dressing room seems to be a gateway to unknown worlds, and of course, you don't know who or what would be behind the curtains. Audiences intrude into actor characters' supposed backstage space, which is connected to Hamlet's fictional world, which in turn resonates with issues of intentionality in communication in audiences' worlds. Some passages in Hamlet are thrown into particular relief by such a setting. Let's think about some of these quotes. Hamlet's railing to Ophelia about her, quote, painted face. God hath given you one face and you make yourself another. And of course, Hamlet's assuming an antique disposition to confound the court. These lines from Hamlet ring true metaphorically and literally as they were made in a dressing room setting. Also juxtaposing other fictional and real worlds is the life-sized tiered Hina dolls. I shall explain that in a minute. So they have this tiered Hina doll display in the play within a play scene where Hamlet tests the conscience of his uncle as part of his investigative project. Dressed up to look like human-sized dolls, the actors participate in the heterotopia that signifies at once the court in Heian era Japan, rituals on the girl's day in contemporary Japan, Hamlet's Denmark, and the stage within a stage. The audience attention was redirected from the representational aspect of theatrical realism to the presentational aspect of meta-theatrical narratives in Ninagawa's heterotopia. And so this is part of the tradition that began in Heian, Japan. It continues to be practiced today, especially on the girls' day. Essentially, these are dolls, and they are meant to carry away bad luck so girls can grow up healthily. And they often set them afloat in the river. You can begin to see the connection to Ophelia. It's entirely unintended, but just a beautiful cultural parallel. So these are real-life Hina dolls, and so it's set on a tier like this. And you can see the parallel in the play, they have human-sized dolls. So here in front of you is actually the mousetrap scene. The traveling players are visiting Elsinore. They put on a play to help Hamlet determine if his uncle is guilty of murdering old Hamlet. The player king and player queen, they descend slowly from the top of the doll tiers to initiate the meta-theatrical performance of the murder of Gonzago. In particular, Kensuke Tsunahara took on the cross-gender role of the player queen in the 2015 production at London's Barbican Centre. A folding fan in hand, he played the queen in the kabuki style of onagata, or female impersonator, and delivered her lines in a sing-song chanting manner. They act out the remainder of the play within a play in aggrandized pantomime. The tiered Hina dolls displays serves as a mirror image of three distinct spaces. First, Claudius' corrupt court. Secondly, the social space of the fictive murder of Gonzago, which is witnessed by characters within Hamlet. And then thirdly, an ordinary Japanese daily artifact, the hinados, now writ large, the dough tiers now populated by life-sized doughs. So this is an excellent example of heterotopia in operation in global Shakespeare. The second case study comes from Hong Kong. Again, you can see multiple cross-references. So I wanted to emphasize that the concept of heterotopia enables us to examine deep connections among adaptations that seem unrelated at first blush. Many adaptations blend cinematic and theatrical modes of presentation. Ninagawa is well known for the cinematic quality of some of his stage productions. He often used semi-transparent screen doors as screens on stage. And so the second case of heterotopia here, part of the focus is not just different locations or overlapping locations, but actually genres. So we have a bit of a tug of war between theater as a medium and cinema. The Hong Kong comedy film, on the left, One Husband Too Many, directed by Anthony Chan in 1988, follows a couple aspiring to introduce Western culture to backwater Hong Kong. They wanted to do this through their iffy performance of Romeo and Juliet. Within the film, the rustic makeshift stage plays a key role as a dramatic device and a venue where cultural values are negotiated. The stage performance is itself a parody of Franco Zeffirelli's 1968 period drama film of Romeo and Juliet. It is also a satire of the canonical doublet and tights style performance that was prevalent on the stages of China and Hong Kong in the 1980s. During their performance of Romeo and Juliet, the on-screen audience's booing interrupts the show. You will see in the video clip that is coming up, the unappreciative crowd starts its own sideshow of tribal violence. When physical fighting breaks out, the couple becomes persecuted lovers, both on and off stage.
冰冻的罗密欧啊，你要我脱下这贵族的丑恶外衣，温暖你的胸膛吗？
有好戏看嘞！
你为我而殉情，我该怎么办？我该怎么办呢？
说笨他，我笨谁？谁敢扁谁？阿志，是不是你在吵啊？扁谁？阿志，是不是你在吵啊？不拍倒锤，拍！不准拍！到我是阿仔。 这不是你气笑的所在啦！你是不给巴斯公面子。你叫的，你还要一小辫呢？哈！不要这样嘛！现在演的是罗密欧与朱丽叶，又不是演线头牌通武丸对四武丸。我只是想把。
The disrupted audience storms the stage and comes face to face with the henchman. Using a low angle, the camera moves between two rows of men lined up like two American football teams ready to charge. The standoff is depicted in a comedic manner with the men twitching their pectorals to make them bounce up and down. This is meant as an aggrandizing gesture before the fight begins. The actor playing Romeo says, "Now it's really Romeo and Juliet." and he finds himself sandwiched between the two gangs. Perhaps the on-screen audience members have now appreciated too well the tragedy about teen exuberance and violence. They have ingested a spirit of feud. Pursued by a torch-bearing mob, the couple has no choice but to flee the scene, carrying with them the idealized form of English theater. So Romeo and Juliet, in a way, ends up playing out in real life. Heterotopia pushes back against the illusion of Shakespeare's ubiquity and universal meanings by pluralizing the artistic positions and political positions across and within different communities. Characters who are betwixt and between worlds and alliances, such as Cleopatra. Think about Viola in Twelfth Night, Edmund the Bastard in King Lear, and the Changeling in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Characters like this are given new arcs when they are interpreted as mixed race or queer. Gender roles in Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet, for example, are reinvented to tone down misogyny or to propose a feminist interpretation. Just a couple of examples. Mamoru Hoshi's movie, University of Laughs, 2004, in which you have a protagonist who's faced with a wartime censor in Japan. He's trying to adapt Romeo and Juliet, but was told to strip all Western references. He ends up writing a parallel play that actually is a better adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, and is presented as a comedy. In Korea, we have Fantasy of the Girls, directed by Jung Min Ahn, 2016. A group of high school girls, they are staging Romeo and Juliet, but also having strong feelings for one another. So it's both a queer lesbian story, but also a meta-theatrical Romeo and Juliet. In the US, more recently, we have bold reimaginations of gender roles, such as Karen Main's Rosaline, which is all about Romeo's ex in Romeo and Juliet. It's the backstory. Claire McCarthy's Ophelia, as you see on the other side, 2018, takes a similar approach. It tells the unknown, untold story of Ophelia. The idea of heterotopia as parallel and overlapping worlds highlights the inherent diversity of global performances and helps us push back against unproductive divisions between the center and the peripheral, even as we seek to understand otherness. Artists often disagree on the meanings of Shakespeare's plays. What they do have in common is their effort to plant new ideas along well-trodden paths and to blaze new trails through long-abandoned territories. Performance styles borrowed from other cultures can help retool some plays for artistic innovation or socially reparative purposes. The heterotopia of theater and film not only create channels between geographic spaces, but also connect different time periods. To quote novelist Minae Mizumura, if we walk through the doors of other languages and cultural spaces more often, we will be blessed with undreamed of landscape and a more inclusive vision. Heterotopia as method helps us understand rather than flatten cultural otherness and the dynamic interplay between cultures. I'm going to stop here and take questions. I look forward to this discussion with you. I see there's one question typed into the Q&A. Mike can come back here, both mics. It's really good to see you. I'm going to start my slide as well. Please feel free to type in more questions as we go.
Well, thank you very much, Alexa, for a terrific talk. Lots to think about there. Shall I start, Mike, or do you want to start?
Go ahead, Mike, because I'm not. I have lost the. I'm not on the screen at this point. So why don't you begin?
Richard Vargaman. Hello, Richard. Thanks for joining us again. He says, "I love the profound psychological Oops, I've lost it. I love the profound psychological insights of Alexa's presentation. For example, the need to understand ourselves when we are encountering others. She also has an unparalleled global knowledge of Shakespeare's reception. It's been shown that hearing more than one language in early childhood leads to measurably greater empathy in adult life. This may be one factor in Alexa's profound empathy for so many cultures and people. What do we know about Shakespeare's life experiences that might help us understand his astonishingly universal appeal? Alexa.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick, for joining us. Always love questions from you. I believe psychoanalysts have very unique insights into arts in general, but also how life experiences influence art. Well, we don't know about Shakespeare's life experiences. We do know his bookshelves, right? What possibly the playwright or perhaps the cluster of creative energies that go under the name of Shakespeare. Which books informed this kind of creativity? One unique feature is that Shakespeare's plays are set everywhere but England, right? Even the history plays is very much about England's self-image, Englishness, but they relied heavily on France, for example, on the others in order to have a self-definition. So the history plays, at first blush, would seem like a national or nationalist narrative. But if you look deeper, you realize the deep inherent global diversity inside, not to mention the comedies that typically set outside of England. Exoticism may play a role, but I think the wide range of reading, particularly of European sources and translations, really played a role. Think about Michel de Montaigne, the Montaigne's travels, and how you begin to see Montaigne's account, for example, of gender fluidity in South France, and how then you read Twelfth Night, you realize there are shadows there. It's not a direct quotation or allusion, but very often I think it's the breadth of readings that contributed to this. As is well known, Shakespeare's biography is really a business of conjecture, and it is fiction. Not much is known, but if we look at the networks, the transactions of ideas among books, Mike set up this lecture series as books that have made a difference. We can look into books that have made a difference in the creation of these plays, and we begin to realize how global it is. In this question, language is also mentioned. Indeed, I was raised in Taiwan, so growing up there, I was exposed to Taiwanese, to Mandarin. I studied Japanese later on in my life, and I'm studying French at the moment, and have to pick up English as my second language. So exposure to languages make me not only empathetic to other cultures, but actually curious. For me, the world is endlessly big, and in fact, that is what drew me to Shakespeare, and eventually to global Shakespeare, right? First, it's the global imaginations within the Shakespearean canon, and appropriately centuries and centuries of global histories of adaptations, translations, and performances of these plays. I find that fascinating and eye-opening, and it really tells us a lot about our own world as well as the worlds of the characters. All right.
Thanks for that. I wonder whether, when you talked about the histories, do you remember that passage in Richard II, where he's talking about a shadow of himself? Can you hear me, Alexa?
Yes. Can you say that again, please?
In Richard II.
Yes.
And he talks about the shadow of himself. He's talking about, and then Bolingbroke contradicts him about what a shadow means. Are you going to any comments about that? It seems Shakespeare, in any case, he's telling us, well, he tells us in Hamlet about he's showing a mirror up to nature, but this mirror has plenty of reflections, and a shadow is different in different ways.
Yeah, I think you're referring to the conversation with the shadow of your sorrow, perhaps.
That's it, the shadow of your
Yeah,
sorrow.
shadow of my sorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think without international affairs, international relations, and global imaginaries, there would be no history plays. This is the deepest paradox and conundrum, but also a unique feature of this canon, even in the history plays. For Romeo and Juliet, Merchant of Venice, Twelfth Night, no surprise, of course, Illyria doesn't even exist, right? It's a cobbled together imagination, so it has to be an elsewhere. But even in Roman plays, in the English history sequences, we have strong shadows of outsiders. Without all of these juxtaposing shadows, there would be no way to define Englishness. Even Welsh accents, for example, you frequently find playful comments on characters who speak in dialects or with accents. And so that speaks strongly to the internal diversity, multilingual roots of Shakespeare. I have other examples that I investigated in a different context. If you look at the use of languages, for example, in the use of words in such places as Macbeth, talking about making in Conradine, talking about the guilt, right? And the fact that Macbeth cannot wash off the blood on his hand. So you have Germanic road red from Groth, as well as in Conradine. It's a repetition with a difference. They're saying the same thing, just red, right? If you wash your hand, you will make the green ocean red. But the variation interested me. Why did Shakespeare need to use words that refer to the red color from various roots? And I think it's a signal, it's a portal, it's just different ways to, different passageways into similar ideas. And that's a recurring feature, multilingualism as well, throughout the canon. I think we have other questions. And thank you, Rick, for your following up comment.
Albina Huang says, to what extent do these elaborate other cultural adaptations preserve and convey the fundamental underlying themes of Shakespeare's message beyond just the plot and characters? For example, Winter's Tale is ultimately about redemption and resurrection, with a clear symbolic reference to the Christian message. Can such a profound message, so deeply grounded culturally and religiously, even be conveyed through these other heterotopic cultural lenses?
Yes, sharing my screen here. All right. Winter's Tale, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Asian American cast, reimagined in both Asia as well as the American West. I do believe the messages and emotional structure, if we speak of emotional structures, not just Christianity in any play, and that can be conveyed as equally striking emotional structures in a different language, in a different adaptation, whether or not they repeat the Christian message. With a play like Hamlet, for example, it's actually interesting to think about the debate about Catholicism versus Protestantism. Is the ghost a Catholic ghost because it's in purgatory? That's actually not the most important or interesting point. You can well have a Buddhist Hamlet. If the adaptation is internally coherent and it is telling a story, it is achieving achieving similar kinds of emotional impact, as in a cross between pastoral, comedic, and tragic modes of expression, as Shakespearean plays often do, then I would say it has conveyed the fundamentals of the artwork, of the play. Above all else, I want to stress how these are actually a form of dialogue, right? It's ongoing dialogue between living artists and those who had come before them, who's no longer here, through the stage and the screen as heterotopia, rather than a mechanical kind of workshop of equivalences as you can slide in those puzzle pieces. These artworks, they are all standalone pieces in their own right, and yet they have an interesting conversation. So what interests me is the conversation productive? Is it generative? Does it bring us somewhere else, rather than saying, with this particular part of the Christian message, is it translated faithfully? But rather, when you say the message about redemption, I agree. Winter's Tale really is about this, and that's why the director talks about social reparation, how important it is for her, in terms of minority representation and self-representation. For me, that is a powerful message of reconciliation and redemption for the 21st century.
Thanks for that. Runakoi Kauri says, a common tool that portrays otherness in Shakespeare is a sort of cosmic imagery, the constant disruption between microcosm and microcosm, like the interminable chain of signification in Othello. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I believe, and thank you for the question. I believe here we're touching on the disruption between microcosm and macrocosm. And Othello was offered as a case study, the cosmic image, imaginary of otherness. In Shakespeare, I think otherness is constructed on multiple levels. We have the more common suspects of race, gender, class, sexuality, language, right? Accents. Think of the French lesson scene in Henry V. But then you also have the cosmic imagery as a way to imagine the order of things, just to borrow from Foucault, and the disorder and the disruption. Frequently, you have this in comedy. You do have a bit of the chain of signification, chain of deferral, I would say, in Othello, in terms of whether intentionality is knowable and what difference would it make, right? Iago throughout plays this constant other in counseling Othello not to do certain things, but it's just reverse psychology. Othello ends up doing exactly what he wants. So I think the question about otherness is rather broad. I think otherness within Shakespeare is embedded in layers of how characters use language. One way to note Othello's the deteriorating state of mind is actually his loss of control of rhetoric. If you think about the scene in the Venetian court, where he eloquently defends himself in Desdemona, to the moments toward the end where all he can say is oh, 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 and oh, right? And a single word, the handkerchief, without actually articulating what is on his mind. And that's a way of, I think that's a form of linguistic racism. In saying, as you deteriorate, you're going backwards to a kind of more primitive stage. So I hope this captures some of the question. This is an excellent question that's worthy of an entire book that I cannot cover here. All right, time for our other questions.
One more. We'll give one more question, which Meredith Stevens. Is there room in today's theatre world that seems to value new works centered on immediate political issues over the classical canon for straightforward, updated productions of Shakespeare?
Thank you. Excellent question. Do we have room for straightforward productions that's not updated? I suppose you meant, the setting, the characters. I'm going to stop sharing here. Of course there is, but also I would like to say there's no such thing as unupdated. You are putting on classic drama in the 21st century. By the very action, it's already quote unquote updated, whether you change the setting visually. Yes, you can do doublet and horses and set it in medieval Elsinore in Denmark. But is that Hamlet then any more authentic? That Hamlet isn't from the 21st century? At the end of the day, we do not breathe the same air. In art, I believe there's no, it's a false dichotomy, I think. The so-called new works that comment on political issues versus performances that are somehow pure, because there is no such thing that is, art cannot be divorced from latent political comments. You see anything, and in your mind, it could be connected, even as a doublet and host performance, it can very well make implicit comments on the situation. So in other words, it's always inherently political, depending on the situation, depending on the world audiences come from. There's no such separation possible. And ultimately, it's not about the style. You can think about Baz Luhrmann's film Romeo plus Juliet. It uses Shakespeare's lines, right? But it's in thoroughly updated setting. Is that then a straightforward retelling? You can have a different performance of Romeo and Juliet, still using every word from Shakespeare, but by virtue of being 21st century actors, you are already updating it because of the status of your embodiment.
Fine, thanks. Mike, do you want to come in at all?
No, that's okay there. What I've always told my students is there's no Hamlet, only Hamlets, which is, I think, what you were saying.
I'm afraid we're coming to the end, so there's one last question from Keshav Bansal. It's a rather long question, actually. Can you read that, Alexa?
I believe yes. Oh.
I've got it back again.
There are instances like Vishal Bhardwaj Haidar, wherein the cultural other Hamlet is adapted to narrate the political other and marginalized Kashmiri. In the narrative, Hamlet's tragedy intermingles with Bashrat Pier's The Curfew Night, a journalistic account of the atrocities perpetrated by the Indian Army in Kashmir in the 1990s, and characters' lives mired in the conflict, othered too in sense of being conspicuously absent from mainstream media discourse in India. How do such juxtapositioning of multiplicity of others superimposing in an heterotopic cinematic oeuvre? We also have a question from Na Yong Seo. I appreciate a discussion of how language exposed you to a bigger world. I have a question about the concept of otherness in Shakespeare from a linguistic perspective. My research focuses on Korean adaptations of Shakespeare. In film adaptations of Hamlet, because Korean does not use pronouns to indicate others, Ophelia underwent gender fluidity without facing questions about her gender identity. What are your thoughts on how language impacts the understanding of various Shakespeare adaptations? So the two end up being related. The first one, Bhardwaj is very prominent Bollywood Hamlet entitled Haida, and it is a thoroughly updated and rewritten version, there is a to be or not to be speech that riffs off of like jazz music, riffs off of Hamlet's speech. But primarily it is social commentary on the current situation in Kashmir, of course, and India's tensions with it. I think it is a clever juxtaposition of multiple worlds, using Hamlet as a vehicle to initiate much needed discussions. At the same time, because of the multiplicity, it makes it interesting. It's not just a newly written work, because it'll route the discussion back to Hamlet, that a lot of people are familiar with and have a lot of things to say, but this is a new context. So you can have conversations about India, early modern imagination of Denmark, all at the same time. There is value to that. In terms of Na Yong's question about language use, I do want to point out that in enjoying all these global adaptations, subtitles are the key, right? For English audiences, we rely on English subtitles, but realize that subtitles conceal as much as they reveal. They are a convenient vehicle to tell you word for word what was just said. But for example, in complex languages like Korean, which is mentioned here, and Japanese, the gendered pronouns, even the first person pronoun is often gendered, that would often be elided. They don't have enough space to indicate the complexity. And that's often where English audiences might miss out in terms of the type of pronoun that are actually used when subtitle merely says I. It's a bit of, it's not mistranslation, but definitely missed opportunity. And you see this in Akira Kurosawa's famous films, Ran and Throne of Blood, for example. It's very hyper-canonical in the West. But the subtitles are both a blessing and a curse. That is not to say we shouldn't be adventurous and continue our exploration of global Shakespeare in Heterotopia.
Thanks, Alexa. It's been a really fascinating afternoon, and I'm very grateful to you. We've gone over time, I'm afraid, but let's just again say thank you to you. Thank you to Mike for coming in. Sorry your technology didn't quite work there, Mike, but thanks for coming in. I hope, ladies and gentlemen, that you'll join us next term on Monday, the April 15th, when Colin Parsons from Georgetown University will be talking about Ulysses by James Joyce. So we haven't got any more now until the new term. We have an interesting talk, however, in our free speech at the International Crossroads coming up on Wednesday, March the 15th, when we will be discussing how language is being used and abused for political ends. It's the language of politics that we're going to be looking at there on Wednesday, March the 15th. I also like to thank Georgetown University for supporting this series, especially Jack DeJoy, the president, and the vice president, Global Affairs, Tom Banchoff, and to our administrators there, Julian Murillo and Mary Gordon. My thanks to Mike Collins for his participation and for his help in putting these things together. I'd like to thank Blackfriars Hall, Oxford, for their support, John O'Connor, the Regent, and Richard Finn, the Director of the Lascaux Institute. I'm always grateful to Maggie Scott, my wife, for helping with all the administration, and delighted that she's back well after a bit of a scare. So we're delighted she's out of hospital. I'm Mike Scott from Blackfriars Hall, Oxford. You can follow me on LinkedIn at Professor Michael Scott and Facebook at Michael Kerr Scott. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you'll come and join us on the 15th of March, and then I hope you'll come back and join us on April the 15th when we're tackling Ulysses. Alexa, many thanks. Mike, many thanks.